Welcome to Addict in the Family, a mom and daughter conversation. We just want to thank you so much for spending your time watching us, and hopefully you get some value out of what you're listening to. If you do, please share the videos, please like and subscribe our channel, and we'd love to hear your comments and things that you'd like to know about or conversations you'd like to hear us have that might help you in your journey to recovery.
Hi, my name is Melissa. This is my mother, Tanya.
Hi.
Today we're going to be talking about being a parent with more than one addict child. So I have a few questions for my mom. So how many kids do you have?
I have 3 children. Melissa is my oldest daughter, and she is 32. I have a younger daughter, Amanda. She is 30, and then my youngest is my son, Joshua, and he is 27.
Okay, and when did you start to notice when Amanda started using?
So Amanda is my second daughter, and Amanda's story differs from Melissa from the perspective of Amanda was a much different child growing up. Melissa got into drugs in that environment, and I didn't recognize what was happening. My younger daughter was molested by a family member, which up until that point, she was a straight A student in grade school and very innocent. And then at 10 years old, her and another family member were molested. And when that came out, it really, for Amanda, it really broke her spirit. And at the time that was happening, I wasn't realizing, that Melissa was using, and Melissa was a resource of comfort for her younger sister. So Melissa being, 13 at the time, and my younger daughter being 10 and going through this situation, she was really seeking her older sister for comfort. And Melissa getting involved in addiction, didn't know how. First of all, she was 13. She, wasn't emotionally prepared to deal with the situation, as it were. And Mandy was really coming apart at the seams. I had her at counseling at school. She was at counseling, a private counselor. But really what she was reaching for was a sister just to protect her, I think, is what she was feeling. And, we'd have to ask her to understand that, I'm sure. But Melissa was in the midst of an addiction, so I didn't recognize that. The only comfort Melissa knew how to give in her addiction was to get her high. And I didn't see that coming. I wasn't even coming to terms yet with the fact that, Melissa, that you were using, much less giving it to a younger kid.
Well, I actually did not give it to her. That is a lie.
Okay.
Anyways, I had some friends over, and a friend of a friend, a girl, she actually gave it to my sister, and I didn't know about it. And when I found out, I was furious. Amanda started hanging out with her own types of crowd who were also using. So that's when Amanda took off. I didn't really use with my sister until later on.
Later.
She was doing her own thing, and I didn't realize she was, starting her own cycle of addiction with herself.
Mm-hmm. And I didn't even, at the time, I hadn't even recognized fully what was happening with Melissa, never mind a child 3 years younger than her. So, fast forward 2 years where Amanda's 12 and Melissa's 15. At that time, my focus was Melissa and her addiction. I still had no idea Amanda had started to use. And so, finally realizing that Amanda was using, it was devastating because I couldn't control her. She was totally gone to the point of running away. I'm tracking her down. We're constantly trying to, lock her in the house and keep control of her. I can't. And then I've got my daughter Amanda, and we have this horrible tragedy that's happened in our family that nobody's dealing with well. Mm-hmm. And then Mandy's now using. I haven't even recognized that at this point. All I think is she's just gone insane because of everything that's transpired and how our family has chosen to deal with this. And so trying to come to grips with both situations what I decided to do was change jobs and move away, and probably 30 miles away across state line. And Melissa refused to come. And she was 16 at the time, and I had to let her go. And that was probably one of the hardest things I did, was actually what felt like abandoning my child to some other drug addict that she was living with. So that was horrible to have to do. But at the same time, I was trying to save my other daughter and my poor son, who was the school jock, always in sports, always so innocent.
And the kid who hated drugs. He
hated drugs,
despised it, and he hated us for it.
He did. Yeah. He was so embarrassed over his sister's behavior, and I just needed to get them out of the area we were in. And, you know, I do believe the area that your kids are growing up in, it matters. Now, my husband at the time completely disagreed with me, but it got so bad that I told him, I'm moving and you can choose to go or not, but I'm leaving with my kids. And so he knew he had to make a decision, and he chose to go with us. And we bought a new home, and we both made decent money. And Melissa refused to go, but I had a bedroom for her, and Mandy and my son. We moved into this neighborhood that was all about family.
Uppity neighborhood. It was a rich neighborhood.
It was a rich neighborhood.
Felt very uncomfortable over there.
I was quite comfortable.
In the white neighborhood.
We were comfortable.
I couldn't even smoke a cigarette outside without feeling awkward.
I know. And Melissa has all the Puerto Rican, seems to have skipped me and gone into my daughter. So she's the one of the family that looks so Puerto Rican, while the rest of us look pretty white. So
yeah, they fit in quite well.
Yeah, we did. We did. So we moved into this neighborhood. Mandy at the time was probably 14. When I moved there, I had actually taken Amanda and forced her to go into an inpatient treatment center for 30 days. So when we first moved there, it was me and my son. My husband at the time was working on our house that we were leaving to get it ready for a rental. But from the moment we moved into that neighborhood, our life changed for the better. It does matter where you're around. It does matter the people your kids are around. And I could actually speak to these parents. In our old neighborhood, it was such a Mexican, Asian community, and I didn't speak those languages. And so trying to communicate with these parents about my kids just didn't happen. They couldn't communicate with me either. It didn't help with their children either. So moving to where we did, and it was predominantly a white neighborhood, upper class neighborhood. I had a new job in that area. It changed our lives, and it did change it for the better. Now my younger daughter still chose to find the one or two people in the neighborhood that did drugs. Yeah. And continued to go down that path of addiction even after I put her in treatment and brought her back. And she did better. She stayed in school for a while, and you know, she was really a smart kid, so she got good grades, that sort of thing, but still, you know, getting immersed in the wrong crowd. One of the things I always wished as a parent, though, was that I had less than beautiful children. And my daughters and my son, they're all very physically appealing. They're beautiful, and as young kids, they were just knockout gorgeous. The girls always looked older than their age, so that was always a struggle. They had opportunity at such a young age because they were so developed and so beautiful, and men gravitated towards them. Not boys, but actual men. It was just a constant battle I was fighting, having to, you know, deal with a 15-year-old who's got 25-year-olds looking at her and trying to take her to parties and this kind of thing. I always hated that they were just so beautiful. I know the other direction can't be easy either, but it is really difficult when you have children who have gotten out of control and that they get every opportunity because they happen to look so pretty. That was always such a real challenge as a parent. But anyways, at the time, Melissa's kind of off doing her thing. I was devastated as a mom. I had started a new job and I was trying to be focused. And Mandy was up and down with using, it was a very family oriented neighborhood. And so there wasn't a lot of the crowd from like it was where we came from. But of course she found a couple of people that actually, were into that sort of thing. It was devastating for me to leave you. That I cried for months leaving Melissa. And at one point, Melissa went to live with my mom. My mom had always tried to step in and help the girls when it came to that sort of thing. And she got so out of hand at mom's house, I had to have her committed. And that was one of the hardest things I ever did. And this had Melissa go into the hospital. She had OD'd basically.
It was on ecstasy.
Barely knew her name. And it was literally 5 days before she's going to turn 18. Well, the doctor did not want to commit her because she wasn't self-harming. She was just out to lunch. And I begged and begged and begged until he agreed to have her committed. And when we had her committed to a recovery mental place.
It was a behavioral place, not mental. It was behavioral.
Mental behavior. So your mental behavior.
Yes.
So the counselor there, when I went to visit, and I was there about every 3 days, after the second week, the counselor's like, Melissa's just now coming out. I feel like I'm just meeting who she actually is. It took that long for her to kind of become her normal self, get the drugs out of her system. And, I never, even though I had to leave my child in Vancouver and move without her because she refused to go, it was heart-wrenching. And part of my focus was just trying to get her back to the family. But at the same time, trying to save my other two children from everything she's exposing herself to. And at that time, I still hadn't really realized how bad Amanda's own addiction was until I'm trying to control her now. And at the time, there wasn't this wonderful thing called a cell phone that everybody had. Mm-hmm. So I had to rely on, I'm at so-and-so's house, Mom, and trying to check those, making sure that she's there. At the same time, trying to build a career with no college degree. I was very focused on having enough money to take care of my kids and make sure they have the things that I never grew up with. But I think my focus was probably a little warped. If you come from my generation and you didn't grow up with a lot of things, you think it's going to be so much better because I make so much more money than my parents. I can give my kids these wonderful things. But really, that's not what it's about. I learned the hard way that those things are awesome to be able to give your children. It's great to move into an amazing neighborhood with really expensive homes because families there really do look out for each other, and I really had resources there to help with my son. So Amanda, in her addiction, went so crazy. I thought she started running away. She started using she found a whole crowd to start using with. I couldn't keep tabs on her. She was 16 at the time. I had someone very close to me that had just committed suicide. So I was dealing with losing my best friend and losing my oldest daughter and watching my second daughter go down that same road. So I was working with her counselor because she was in and out of counseling, and I decided to send her away to a boarding school. This was a Christian boarding school in the state of Florida, so I was basically flying her across country, dropping my child off. The idea of doing it was specifically traumatizing to me, but I also felt like she was so out of control that she would be dead if I didn't do something. And I'd already in my head lost my oldest daughter, and I was traumatized over that. I had just lost my best friend and cousin, and I was traumatized over that, and I just couldn't imagine losing another child. So I tricked her into thinking that she was going to a fun boarding school where she'd be surfing at the beach and
Poor
field
Amanda.
trips.
Jeez.
And at the time, we were also planning a trip to Jamaica with some friends and my son, and she thought she was going to get to go. So in her mind, we were taking her to boarding school in Florida, and then she'd hop this 2-hour flight over to Jamaica and meet us all there. I knew that wasn't going to happen, and so did her counselor. And her counselor, because we were being deceitful, I had a real issue with deceiving my child. I had always, at the very least, been honest about what was happening with him. And now I'm blatantly lying to my daughter, telling her that she's going to go to this amazing boarding school and she'll get better and not be using and around good people and get to go on the family vacation, knowing this is a lockdown Baptist girls only boarding school out in the middle of nowhere. And so I was feeling very deceitful. But the counselor said to me, her counselor said, typically I would not condone lying, but if we don't do something this drastic, she'll be dead. And so that's what I did. I hopped a flight to Florida with her, had it in her head this was going to be, a vacation school basically. And we landed in Pensacola. I drove her out 10 miles from the Alabama border on this property it was in the middle of nowhere, and it was a Christian-based boarding school on lockdown. And walked in, and I remember the gal the intake woman, she comes out and she's talking to me, and she looks at me and she said, "She's coming willingly?" Because she's telling me usually they have to send people in the middle of the night to kidnap kids to get them to come to this place.
Gosh.
And she's like, "How did you get her here willingly?" And I'm like, "Well, I told her it was a co-ed boarding school and she'd be snorkeling and skiing." And she's cracking up and she's like, "Well, she's got a rude awakening."
Yeah.
So I hugged her, told her I loved her, and I left her. And I drove straight to the airport. I sobbed the entire way. I got on the plane. I was so hysterical on the plane. The guy next to me tapped me on the shoulder to ask me if I was okay. And I said, "I'm fine, leave me alone," and had my face on the window. And I sobbed literally from Florida all the way back to Washington. Hysterical on the plane. I'm sure they thought I was having some sort of a mental breakdown. But I had never left my kid. She's 16 years old. I already felt like I lost my oldest daughter for the most part. And now I'm dropping off another one, and God knows what's going to happen to her. And one of the stipulations of taking her to that school is I would not be able to talk to her or see her for 3 months, which was an eternity. Mm-hmm. So I get home, and eventually, she was allowed to write letters to me. I didn't know at the time that they tore up about the first 4 letters she wrote. I'm sure she had some choice words for me. But they read all her stuff before she could send it. And then we started writing letters, and when I went to see her after 90 days, it was my mom, my husband, and myself drove out there, and I went to see her, and it was the most amazing experience, and she was the happiest I had seen her pretty much since the time she had been molested. And so it was great to see her, even at 16, be a little girl again. And for the first time, I had hope that maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't follow in her sister's footsteps and end up with this horrible addiction. So that was basically the beginning of a different chapter for Amanda. And unfortunately, she continued in her addiction and is there today. But if we go back and talk about her brother, when she left, Joshua, for the first time, could actually just be a kid. And he could have his football friends over. He was a jock. He played basketball and he played football, and he was all-star at both. He was amazing. And very popular, very blessed in everything that surrounded him. He's an amazing person still to this day. Mm-hmm. And for the first time, he could really be happy and really have his friends over and not worry what they were going to see or what his sisters were going to expose and embarrass him with. by their addictions and them being kids still and not recognizing how it was affecting their little brother, who was mortified at what they were doing and their behavior. It was really hard for my son through school to deal with his sister's actions. But when Amanda was gone, she was gone for 12 months. And that was probably the happiest 12 months of my son's life in high school. And he was an all-star football player by the time he was a freshman, and focused on having fun. He was not a smoker, he was against all those things. And it was hard for him to deal with all the things his sister had exposed him to, including he couldn't have certain friends at his house because his sister lived there and she had a bad reputation. So this was all very traumatic for him. But Amanda came back to live with us after, I think it was right before she turned 18. And, Josh was in middle of high school and things had calmed down, and she came back, and probably the first 6 months did okay. She did pretty good, but she had gained a lot of weight. One of the things that the girls always struggled with when they were teenagers, these were beautiful girls. They grew up popular. Even if you didn't recognize it, people were over themselves at how beautiful you guys were. And so they had opportunity far too young, just way too young. That, I wish they hadn't had those kind of looks. To put the shame aside and be able to talk about it was so hard, because you feel so judged. Typically speaking, back then especially, earlier on in my career, people didn't talk about it. First of all, we probably didn't have the epidemic that we do now, but people weren't talking about it. So I'm at work and people are talking about their kids graduating from high school. I didn't have one child graduate from high school.
Maybe graduate from treatment, but that's about it.
Yeah. So when someone's telling me about their high school graduation, I'm like, and I'm thinking, well, my kid's in treatment for the third time. Yay! There's nothing in common there. But I also learned that I had to stop being embarrassed, which never really goes away. But I had to get to a place that I could talk about it, and I was open about it. And I am now. I now, as soon as I started a new job, I've been there 3.5 years. When I started 3.5 years ago, within the first 2 days I was there, my team knew I have Addicts for Children, because we did a team building exercise where we talk about something personal. Tell me something about yourself. And I said, I have children that are addicts. This is what we deal with. And I tell people that because people are so alone and afraid and ashamed to talk about addiction. But it touches virtually everybody, whether it's somebody you know who's an addict, somebody in your family, somebody yourself, somebody knows somebody that knows somebody who's addicted to something, alcohol, drugs, whatever. It has to be talked about. We have to find a way to get past the shame of our own experiences so that we can heal, so that we can help those people. And I didn't have anybody reach out to me as a parent of addicts to help me. I had to find a way to help myself and not want to die. That was, not everybody has that kind of tenaciousness to continue looking until you find something that is healing. I did it primarily to hopefully get my kids to go down a healing path. And you have to be healthy if you have to be able to demonstrate health if you want to have someone else be healthy, if that makes sense. So, did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Were you ever angry with us? And when did that anger start? And how do you deal with your anger?
No, I wasn't fucking angry with you. Are you fucking kidding me? There are times I wanted to beat the shit out of every one of you, and I could have strangled you myself.
Yeah.
Yes. Just the hopelessness of it and the lack of any kind of control, and especially when they were growing up, I was probably a lot more angry in those days because I didn't really understand addiction. As they got older, the anger came when they had children. That was by far harder for me to watch and deal with than just watching them abuse themselves.
Mm-hmm.
When you put children, grandkids, innocent kids that have no control over their own situation, and then knowing how I raised my children and how I would never treat my kids that way, and what my grandkids were exposed to was infuriating to me.
Mm-hmm.
And short of taking custody and raising all my grandkids, which I refuse to do, and that's probably a very controversial subject because, you know, what do you do? What's the right answer? Do you sacrifice your life and raise your grandkids and deal with potentially this whole thing over again? Do you put ownership back on your kids? And what transpires here is your responsibility. Get your head out of your ass and be a mom.
Yeah.
Right? What's the right thing? And the truth is there isn't one. It's not right. It's not wrong. It's just how you can cope as a person. It's how you can mentally get through it.
Yeah.
You know, I did not take custody of my grandkids. Melissa was the first to have a son, and they did live with us. She did come back to the house and live with us when David was little. And I did have him a week at a time when she was out in her addiction, and his dad had him a week at a time, who was also an addict, but was in recovery for at that period when that was happening. It is excruciating to watch that. So there was a lot of anger around my grandkid situation more than there was. It's bad enough to watch them abuse themselves, but my grandkids had no control over what was happening. So,
How do you look at anger now?
well, I think we're human, and all of us are going to be angry. If I think back to those moments when I was angry then, I can easily, those moments can come back up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have a lot more understanding and compassion now. And, you know, I advise people to try to get through the anger through therapy or what works for you and find your empathy. It's not understanding. I don't understand to this day how my kids put their kids through what they have. I don't have an understanding of that. And I just don't. But I have empathy and I have compassion. And my kids had me. And I do have custody of one of my grandkids. I did have some of my grandkids live with me for periods of time that don't anymore. I have given up parts of my life to be there for my grandchildren and for my kids. And the truth is, if I didn't love my kids, I wouldn't worry about taking care of their kids. But I love my kids. I would die for them. Mm-hmm. And when I couldn't help them, I could help with my grandchild. You know, whatever that looked like at the time. I wasn't quite willing to adopt and give up my life. I've had it's been a hard life. It's not been easy to live through between the way we were raised and then, you know, thinking you're going to do this life and not expose your family to what you were exposed as a child to. And then have your children literally drag you through the fucking mud of every experience you knew you would never have. It was traumatizing. It was absolutely exhausting and traumatizing.
Can I just say, I'm so sorry.
This isn't to make you feel bad. No, I love you. And look
really
at you today.
everything.
But at the same time, we all make mistakes. Melissa, look at where you are today. Mm-hmm. You are a beautiful young woman who has come out the other side, not easily, I might add, and you're working in an industry now where you're helping people. Mm-hmm. Your kids are okay. I mean, kids are kids. Mm-hmm. They're, you know, we contribute to some of the chaos and sometimes we don't, mm-hmm. but you're a good mom and you're doing what you can to help other people. I am so proud of you. I can hardly breathe when I talk about where you've come. That's mm-hmm. so amazing. So you don't have to be sorry. Your experiences are going to help other people, mm-hmm. just like mine might.
Yeah. And I think that's all we have for now.
Okay. I love you.
I love you.
One thing I will say to whoever happens to be watching, don't give up. This child weighed 70 pounds at one time. She's OD'd multiple times. I've planned her funeral for years and years, over and over, just trying to mentally prepare myself for that day that I had to bury my child. So don't give up hope. There is hope. People do come out of it. And there isn't one way to support your child. Your boundaries are going to be different than someone else's. You find what allows you to live if they die. And that's your boundary. No one else gets to place it for you. They don't tell you what it is. It's not up to your husband, your mom, other family members, friends. You define your own boundaries with the addicts in your life. And that's okay. And if other people walk away from you because of it, for me, that's been okay too. My kids are my life. They always have been. And I am happily married to a man who's wonderful and supports me 110%. But he also understands I have grandkids and kids. This is part of my life. And, I'm still happily married.
Yeah.
And I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
So don't fucking give up.